Hello. As a bit of a change of pace, I've decided to do this video outdoors. And so let us begin talking about Halloween Horror Nights from the year 1998, the Halloween Horror Nights VIII. Primal Scream, the last scream you'll ever hear. This was the first year I actually managed to acquire a bit of Halloween Horror Nights merchandising. In fact, what I acquired, and the earliest item I have, the earliest souvenir of the event that I still have, which is this little, hope you can see that, it's a little doubloon from the parade that year. And as you can see on the doubloon, you have an image of a face bursting through some sort of barrier, trying to burst through a barrier, screaming in horror, agony, or perhaps anticipation as it tries to make our way from the other side into our world. This image may have been inspired by the artwork for a motion picture released sometime shortly before that called The Frighteners, directed by the New Zealand film director, what's his name? The fellow who did all the Lord of the Rings, Jackson, yes, Peter Jackson, who directed the Lord of the Rings films, starring our friend Michael J. Fox from the Back to the Future films. One of the last films he did before he became unable to act regularly, although he does manage to continue fairly well. If you watch the movie carefully, you can see how his Parkinson's affected the filming, but they managed to cover it up very well in the film. But you can see that he has a certain way of moving. He was always a bit nervous, and but they managed to make it look like it's just, he's like hyperactive or something, and doesn't have any physical disabilities. But nowhere near as clever as it did years and years later when he, well into his Parkinson's, played a brain surgeon on Scrubs, which was a brilliant bit of casting. I always thought an actor with Parkinson's playing a brain surgeon. I thought that was hysterical. But enough of that. For those of you who are interested in the legendary truth, and without going insane acting like I'm possessed by evil forces, I would like to say that this too could be a connection to the fear creature trying to break through into our world but not succeeding, just as before in Halloween Horror Nights VI we had that something clawing its way through but not quite succeeding. And so here we have a face of fear, perhaps. But is this, in a way, it kind of looks a bit like him, doesn't it? Maybe this is the face of fear once again, trying to break through, but not quite succeeding then until now, when he did succeed, thanks to the efforts of some of us who put together the Portametus design and summoned him into our world at last. Oh dear. What do I and Dino Pirate, and actually he wasn't there that night, but he should have been, and Rob and the others have to answer for? Oh my, Ignatius says it's all our fault. Bit of a hypocrisy there, if you ask me, but that's the way it goes, I guess. In a bit of self-defense for that, if Walter Peck hadn't flipped the switch and let all the ghosts out, it would have been a rather boring movie. You need somebody to open the box, to flip the switch, to push the do not push button, to, play with the puzzle box, whatever it might be, to go to the camp that you're told not to go to because there's a death curse and you're all doomed. Because if you don't, then the movie is boring, and you need to have something to set the things into effect to make it interesting. And wouldn't it be terrible if fear wasn't able to emerge into our world? What kind of event would we have? for Halloween Horror Nights 20. So really, you should be thanking us. Anyway, enough of that. Back to 1998. Once again, it expanded, but only by one more night. Yes. Previously it had been 18 nights, now it was 19 nights in 1998. This is also an interesting year for me personally. In the first 7 years, I only managed to go to Halloween Horror Nights on my own, flying solo, and this was the first time that I actually went with other people, a couple of friends, so I could enjoy the event with others, not just seeing it for my own. And that affected my enjoyment in certain ways, because some people didn't like things that I like, and some people like things that I don't like, and so it's you see the event through others' eyes when you go with other people. That year, once again, we had well, actually, this time for once they listed the 2-in-1 houses as if they were two separate houses for the first time. So instead of saying they only had 3 houses, they admitted they actually had 5, because they did the dual house thing twice. So we had one standalone house called Hell's High in Nazermans, which was a high school, and you got to go through all the various places you'd normally find in a high school: classrooms, locker rooms, cafeteria, and you would see them all done horrible, bloody, gory, because apparently they were filming a slasher movie in an old derelict high school, and things turned into a real-life situation rather than just being a movie. And one of my favorite was a ghoulish jock stuffing a ghoulish nerd into a locker. Sort of even in the afterlife, things don't change. Oh well. Then there were the 2-in-1 houses were the SS Titanic, which was a takeoff on the popular huge hit Titanic from the previous summer, which had become the #1 box office film of all time. A huge, overlong blockbuster film about a ship sinking. The movie was actually longer than it took the ship to actually sink in real life. Plus, why did there was enough room for 2 people on that piece of wood at the end of the movie? She killed that guy. I mean, basically, that's the only way I can look at it. Rose, she killed Jack, and it's really a bad movie in some ways, although people love the movie, and I shouldn't say that, but for me it was like, damn, that bitch killed him. Oh, anyway, Titanic had 2 sections. Just as in the movie, it was very clear there was a huge social distinction between people who got to be in first class and people in steerage. They locked up the people in steerage and let them drown, and the first class people got to be on the lifeboats first. In the same way, there were 2 separate houses: Fear in First Class and Carnage Crew. All of it, both houses presented in the earthquake queue, and both being full houses. Managed to put 2 full houses in one area like that was pretty impressive, actually. Delightful house, wonderful, one of the best ever, and lots of bits of comedy mixed in with it. You would go through the first class section, you get to go up on deck and see Rose and Jack's skeletons on the, remember, I'm king of the world, and Rose and Jack over on the prow of the ship. Well, you have 2 skeletons there where they're supposed to be. There's some nice animated skeleton work in this as well, and of course in the Carnage Crew you could be chased around by the ship captain and other members of the crew who would try to kill you because it was a ghost ship sinking rather, or a ghost ship having risen from the seas perhaps that had sunk, whatever you want to think about it. Delightful house, wonderful. And again, for connections, a nautical horror house came back a few years later in 2002, but the Ship of Screams didn't really compare to the original Titanic. Then, of course, we have Museum of Horror. This time not just called Museum of Horror. They dropped the Universals off the front of it, but it was the same sort of house they'd had years before. Once again, divided into 2 halves for modern and for classic horror. The classic side was called Chamber of Horrors. The modern side was called Unnatural History. When you entered into Chamber of Horrors, of course, had your classic Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman done brilliantly. as usual, continuing the same thing they'd done in previous years. But again, every year they seem to make the set pieces more wonderful. You know, big graveyards of Frankenstein might be in, forests for the Wolfman, that sort of thing. In the Museum of Horror side, I mean the Unnatural History side, they actually made it look more like a museum when you entered, with all the various slashers from modern horror films standing on pedestals. You know, like Michael Myers, Leatherface, the Ghostface Killer from Scream, for example, all standing on pedestals, like you're in an actual museum. And you go through rooms where you had these characters in play. There were rooms for The Exorcist. There had been the year before as well. Rooms for The Exorcist and one for Poltergeist, which was new that year completely, with little Carol Ann with the television. They're here. Wonderful, wonderful scenes throughout it. I'm not quite certain. Maybe someone can help me with this. In either 97 or 98, in one of these houses, they had an X-Files room, I think. I may be misremembering. I may be remembering another alien abduction type, Roswell type house from the year 2000, which was called Total Chaos. If there was an X-Files room in one of these houses, could someone please let me know, and also let me know exactly which year it was. Right. Bad habit. Do not imitate Dr. Jimmy. Any young people, do not imitate Dr. Jimmy. This is a bad habit. And you shouldn't do this. Although I only smoke occasional cigars, I don't smoke 6 packs a day of cigarettes like some people. Still, nasty, dirty, filthy thing. Don't think I'm cool because I'm smoking a cigar. I could probably die of cancer or something, so it's bad for me. I should quit. All right. Anyway, now that I put that disclaimer in, let's continue. First, let me see how long it's been taking me. Okay, I still have 3 minutes. I'm not going to finish this in 15, obviously. It'll have to be a part 2. Let's see. Shows. There were lots of interesting shows that year. Horrorpalooza, very interesting show. It was another one of your rock and roll shows. I think mainly they actually had good acts. Some on peak nights they actually had named bands in, but the rest of the time they would have like Kiss Army or somebody performing. Your Kiss imitator band. And of course there was also a show they had frequently throughout the evening where they married Chucky and Tiffany. The Bride of Chucky was in theaters that year, Universal Picture, and so Chucky and Tiffany made appearances where a sort of demonic preacher, of all things, would wed the two of them on stage. Another very interesting show that year was called Inferno, which was basically Cirque du Soleil from hell. And that was a very interesting show. I rather liked it. I did manage to see that one. If you've been to Cirque du Soleil at Disney, at La Nuba, they have a thing where a guy is grabbing these 2 long strands of cloth and he sort of flies around. They had that kind of act at this show. It was very well done, with a little bit of a evil spin and Inferno, hell spin to it, which was very clever. Very, very good. If you like, and if you like looking at beefcake, of course, that was a factor as well. And there were lots of scantily clad ladies included, so it was good for everybody. Then, of course, we had the one and only, I'm running to about 1 minute now, one and only Scare Zone Midway of the Bazaar came back yet again, naturally, in Amity, with your regular clownish cast of horror and Lost in the Fog. And the parade that year, of course, is the reason why they only had the Scare Zone in Amity. They had a parade, and I did manage to snag a doubloon that year. It was really good. And they had the usual floats, including Darkness and some others, voodoo floats, but also they had a special float with the Grand Marshal of the parade, which were actually Grand Marshals, Chucky and Tiffany, on their wedding float filled with evil toys and dolls. And I'm just about need to wrap this up, so I'm going to stop this now, and I'll do a second video where I talk about Bill and Ted that year. All right?